how worried are you about Michigan at this point? They've now lost 2 of their last 3. They didn't look great, or I'm sorry, 2 of the last 4. They didn't look great in any of them. They've all of that momentum they had coming off of the pause seems like it kind of has gone away a little bit. At the same time, they played 3 games in 6 days, 2 straight games against the same opponent. One of that opponent happened to be a rivalry game. The last 2 weeks, Michigan State has won 3 games against top 10 opponents. So it's not like this was necessarily the most ridiculous string of occurrences. So where do you stand on Michigan at this point?
I'm still in with Michigan. At the end of the day, like watching the game, it was funny. We had the talk on our locker room. We're talking about ways that you can stop Michigan, and I mean, they kind of made Smith and not as much Brooks because he wasn't chucking up shots, but they kind of made Smith and other guys beat them rather than letting Dickinson and Franz do all of the work. They made it very difficult for those guys, and not to mention we talked about Smith and Brooks being able to, well, more or less, we just talked about Michigan being able to stop good guards on the other end. And Rocket Watts was just toward the end of the first half and with his scoring, and then going into the second half, obviously with his scoring and playmaking for everybody on the team, like he did everything. Not everything, not by himself. I mean, obviously he had some help, but he was amazing today.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Michigan is always going to end up being, it's always going to come down to the guard play for me. And the fact that Eli Brooks put out with, I think it was an ankle injury. Did he roll? I think he rolled his ankle.
Yeah, he sprained his ankle.
So, I mean, obviously that's going to be huge for them long term. They don't have a ton of backcourt depth, and not having him there is going to hurt. But I honestly took more away from this about Michigan than I did, or I'm sorry, about Michigan State than I did about Michigan. Look, I've kind of said it all along. I bought into it a little bit, and I'm kind of mad at myself that I went away from what my initial sense was. But I do think that Michigan is not quite at the same level as Baylor and Gonzaga. And I know we have this argument all the time and whatever, but it's just it's the fact that their guard play is not as good as those other teams' guards are, and they are a little bit limited up front. I keep going back to that, and I'm tired of making the same point over and over again. But to me, this had a lot more to do with what this Michigan State team can be. We're seeing the team that we thought was going to be a top 15 team because Aaron Henry has spent the last 3 weeks playing like an All-American. Rocket Watts, what he was tonight, he had, let me make sure I got this right. He had 21 points, 4 boards, and 4 assists. That's what we thought he was going to be all season long. When they beat Illinois the other night, he had 15 points and 5 assists. Like, that's what we thought he was going to be all season long. And in the interim, in the 4 games between these 2 games, he had 16 points. He had 1 game where he went scoreless in a win against Indiana. When they got blown out at Maryland, he was 2 for 7 from the floor. When they got blown out at Michigan, he was 3 for 8 from the floor. So you see the good and the bad with Rocket, but you can see how good they can be when you get good Rocket Watts. And to me, that's kind of the frustrating part about watching and following this Michigan State team. I'm sure that the Spartan fans feel the same way. But I'll leave it at this. I would not want to be. I think this win puts Michigan State into the NCAA tournament, regardless of what happens in the Big Ten tournament, because they get Maryland in the first round. That's not going to be a bad loss. It's going to be a quad one opponent. So I think that they're in the tournament regardless of what happens. You add 3 top 10 wins to your resume in the last 2 weeks of the season, you're going to jump a lot of people in the pecking order. Yeah, I mean, imagine being a 5 seed, right? And seeing Michigan State. Yeah, that's brutal. Just that absolutely sucks. Brutal. I can see them being a team that makes it. I can see them get to the second weekend if they get good Rocket Watts, and if they get, like, imagine being Virginia and the team that you draw in the first round after you win the ACC regular season title, you get a 5 seed, and this team you draw in the first round of the NCAA tournament is Michigan State.
Tom Izzo and Michigan State.
Tom Izzo with Aaron Henry and Rocket Watts playing well. It's rough.
This the wrong in the afterlife.
Yeah, and it could end up happening. So, that's. I mean, I'm not too worried about Michigan long term, but again, like, this was the things that we were talking about all season long, I think, are starting to come to fruition, and that's kind of where I'm at.
I mean, young guards. I mean, the young guards, like Rocket just went through basically any type of like they started out the season hot and then got extremely cold, and just seeing him be able to bounce back toward the end of the season where it matters most is very important for Michigan State. So